Hey everybody, this is Rydo, and we're back to Indiana Jones and the Emperor's Tomb. So, we went full mystical at some point in this, at the very end of the last recording, actually. We went through a mystical gate in the Emperor's Tomb, and now we are, I guess, in the Emperor, in the underworld, if the pause screen is to be believed, or the netherworld. The Pillars of the Underworld is the chapter name. It's... The last section was being chased by the Nazi guy in the tank, so they just killed him off kind of unceremoniously by him falling down the pit. Falling down a pit, not a pit in the netherworld, but a pit in the real world. After a very, very difficult, frustrating long chase sequence. And let's see. None of my buttons are working because I don't have the right equipment equipped. I needed to have this equipped. So we have statues that are animating, which I don't really have a problem with that so much, because it kind of does make some sense that the statues would have eventually animated, but it's just weird to have all this mystical in the last sixth of the game, or last third of the game. Like, at this point we're not even really doing the game we were playing before this point, for the vast majority of time before this level, these last levels. Well, let's see what happens when we spin that one. Do these have to continue to spin, or do they stop spinning? Yeah, they stop spinning. So we're gonna have a timed sequence here, and then I imagine it seems like they all last about the same. There are hanging lanterns, so it would potentially make some sense that the it would make some sense that maybe you could swing. I really do think the game is just trying to screw over players at this point, that they're trying to hide all their bad content as far to the end as possible. In that case, you have you have the central central bar being an issue. So a quick kill of that guy there stopped the two statues from attacking. I knew we were going to see these statues because this is what they really found in the Emperor's Tomb. It was really found in the real world. So it would make a lot of sense that they would have become animated in some kind of mystical way. And in all fairness, yes, Indiana Jones stories always do tend to have a mystical element right at the end. And even Tomb Raider games, at least for the Tomb Raider reboots, but pretty much for all of them, tend to have a mystical element. And just barely make that on time. Now it'd be great if that was a checkpoint, but I'm fairly certain it won't be a checkpoint. I don't really agree with the idea of having to hit that guy at a distance twice. And in that instance, I wasn't able to avoid fighting the people. So, what we want to figure out first try is the order at which to spin these, because it seems to me fairly obvious that there's a proper order, and this is like the music Simon Says element. Now weirdly, this one lasted the longest. So, if anything, that feels like that is just unnecessary. So I'm thinking, can we set these? I've lost the order. Like, if you can reset them, but this is like number 3. So I think the move is this, then this. No, it's 2, then 4, then 2, 4, this, and then this. That's what I'm thinking. Let's check that. We just want to get this right, because if you die, we're back to square one. 2. One of those takes forever to disappear. So actually 4 probably should be the first move. So it should probably be 4, 2, 1. Yeah. And then 3. Four, 2, 1, and 3. And I would guess that all this spinning would no, I think it's probably 2, 4, 1, 3. And we're going to actually try it this time. Because we've got to just pull the trigger here. Otherwise we are just going to take forever. And the stupidity here is at any point I could just mess up. And interesting. That looked like that would have let me that really looked like it was going to just let me swing a second time. Yeah, the slight difference here. We're destroying the statues fairly easily, but it does seem like I could get knocked off the ledge pretty easily. Or in some other way just get messed up. And this is where in a modern game you would definitely want another checkpoint. What would be more annoying, I guess, is if there were actually checkpoints here. I also suspect what we're going to find out is that there's going to be like a really, really long jump here. Just like jump, climb on the ledge, and then jump, climb off the ledge. Yeah, there's not really too much to learn from any of that, so we might as well just go. Do 2, do 1, jump at the very end, jump up here, jump swing. That swing did not last as long as I would have liked it to. There's, again, no just pausing the game when you're switching items though, so... So I'd like to just hit this guy and defeat that part, and then deal with the rest of this. These guys are not hitting very hard, and I am hitting hard enough to break apart these statues. I guess those guys could hit me hard if I wasn't careful. We have a weird situation here. I suspect there is a collectible that way. But this game doesn't have achievements or anything like a modern game, so there's really no reason to collect the collectibles. And we've missed tons of them, undoubtedly, from the previous levels. So I don't think I'm going to go that way. What could be annoying is if we find out that actually we do have to go that way. It could also be annoying if we find out that the dragon mirror is playing a role. The real solution to this problem, first and foremost, would be to not put something right in the middle, because that's going to get in the way. So we know to start off with the first one is 3. Lucky start. So that's probably 3, 4, then, no, 3, 5, 4, and then maybe 2. No. And then I guess we just have to sit here and wait. So 3, 5. 4, 1, there, yeah, 1, 2. Okay, and then we'll just watch these to make sure that these all fall down pretty much as soon as it stops spinning. It does seem like that is the case. Of course, this screws up and we're back to the beginning of the entire level. So we're just hoping to get lucky. After this point, we kind of know that there's a decent chance. Wow, that was lucky to make it that far. There's a decent chance that there's just a boss fight. Now these lion symbols tend to spit out a ghost out of their mouths. Instead we just have a cutscene, and we've completely forgotten about the ninja girl love interest. So we got a checkpoint, good. You can't preemptively break these like you could with the men in the suits of armor in the German castle. It really doesn't look like there's anything else around here, so this is just a ornately designed area, seemingly for no reason. So the lamp and lightning puzzles and platforming. I was kind of expecting there to be more fighting. We're now in that weird mode that they introduced before. Okay. I think I've got it. And I don't think there's really a problem here until we start to see red dots. Seems like you can't walk anywhere. The camera is changing pretty drastically when you are standing on these platforms versus the other platforms. The flickering here, I would say, doesn't feel interesting. Am I supposed to stand on everything? Or am I supposed to run and jump? Because the camera's not really changing. Yeah, it almost seemed like you have a bit of a timer to get on the green platform. But it does seem like they're giving you more than enough time with this wonky mechanic to get to where you need to be. Clearly, though, this is a whole system that was designed around copying the events of The Last Crusade, and they're not doing anything new or interesting with that. You can't break these vases.
Jackpot.
There's a collectible item. And then you have this big golden parchment and what looks like a throne, maybe with somebody sitting on it. You don't get really a zoom when you go into that first person mode. We still need to fight the guy in charge of the triad.
Qin Huang Di, first emperor of China. Looks pretty good, all considered. I don't think he'll be needing this.
You know, notice that the guy is blinking. Yeah. You know, maybe this is a bad way for Indiana Jones to be the bad guy again, because he should be smarter than just to take something without noticing some scrawlings or warnings or something. We've just stolen some kind of black pearl.
No!
And it's like possessing him.
Fool! Did you really think that a common be allowed to live with the dragon's heart? Only a true servant of God can wield this awesome power.
So yeah, once again we're getting into very video game mystical fighting here. There's our ninja lady showing up out of nowhere. Well, running didn't work there. So, will running work here? No. So the idea of running is not an option, so why not give me better directions? And that is a prime example where the female love interest, who isn't an expert archaeologist in all histories around the world, should have been around. So she would have yanked it and set off the course. You can see his eyes are still glowing.
Let's go.
And then we have an almost kiss again, either because they can't animate it or they just don't want to animate a kiss. And then our love interest once again disappears from the scene. This is a cool animation, big giant dragon. How do you fight a big giant dragon? Okay. I suspect the move here is to probably go to different edges and at very least research what these are. What am I trying to do here? Well, that teleport doesn't seem to be working now. Yeah, these look like teleporters. But maybe there's a specific order? Or something else? I don't know. I don't know what I'm supposed to be fighting. You'd think you'd just be fighting the enemy. And I said at the end of the last episode that this very possibly would be like a 20-minute episode, and it does seem like that is a possibility here. Okay, I see one platform over there without a smoke on it. But then I see one over here that does seem to work. Let's turn on the lantern and see if the soul mirror helps us figure out. He just seems like he's shielded, and he seems like he's hitting really hard. I see a fire one over here. Oh wait, I think I've got it now. I noticed that there was a glowing orb around our weapon. So, let's assume that if I run this way with this, I then have some kind of charged attack that can either attack this guy or maybe, yeah, this moves us back to that weapon So I think what I'm figuring out here is you have 4 different directions. One is earth, wind, air, and fire. And you go through those teleports, and those teleports. So he's like maybe fire now. But that's a very unfair swing, certainly, in that you have to effectively walk on the right side of a broken bridge. Then my question would be, is the yellow that he's attacking with mostly here A? Alright, so I think that was fire. Which this is probably water. And I guess the question will come down to which of these are run and jump to press B, and which of these are hold B. So you're only getting like one hit. This guy's just going to be in the way. Now, where are you? So,
it's the source of its power.
So we get a cutscene. Does that mean we've now found a way to defeat this guy? If only there was a way. The platforms have changed, I think. If only there was a way to switch to the whip instantaneously, I could have done that sequence a lot better. Just one punch into the heart.
And we barely got out before it all collapsed.
Now we're back at that club.
Not that I have anything to show for it.
You have to
Which is ridiculous.
gratitude. Chinese people.
You can see her hands not animating well at all. So yeah, the kissing animation would probably be pretty bad too.
But Kai may be gone. The black still remain. I have much work to do.
But they did it once, and it's not terrible, so
But it can wait until tomorrow.
seems ridiculous to tease a kiss
But Indy
2 times before showing it at the very end.
to talk about Hachi job.
Love shaking.
So that directly puts this whole experience happening right before the events of Temple of Doom, which doesn't really fix the problem that they're stealing content left and right from Temple of Doom and the Last Crusade, because obviously this game came out severely severely after the events of the movies. So we know there couldn't possibly be a collectible in the epilogue. So I never really got a good idea of whether the art pieces in the lower left here were supposed to indicate whether you found a collectible or not. It might be that. It might just be that there's some concept art and then they used some replacement filler concept art. If it was actually concept art, it's possible that this one image is slightly different from that image the next time we see it. There's a lot of items here that in a more modern game you would have zoomed in on and let us view in like a 3D model viewer, which is pretty much built into the Unreal Engine at this point, and probably most engines. But yeah, I don't know if I really even have anything more to say. It feels like you have two very different games in that you're fighting the Nazis the first half of the game, and then at some point I feel like, since this game was released in 2003, I feel like they actually did find the Emperor's tomb in China, in the real world, somewhere slightly before then, and they changed their mind. It's also very possible that 2 to 3 to maybe even 4 or 5 different companies worked on this game, because the first third of the game is completely different feeling with different gameplay mechanics. That first level, in comparison, is way more simple, and even like this Kraken's Lair boss fight feels really different from the mystical stuff that we're fighting. You just wouldn't really go to a Nazi castle and a Istanbul flooded Poseidon themed underwater section if you were trying to stay thematically around Chinese myths. There's plenty of myths around China. China's a big place with a lot of history that you could have had the entire game around China, around the Asias at least, for it to make sense. A lot more sense than fighting a Dr. Frankensteinian monster at the end of the Prague level. It would make a lot more sense for the astrologer's clock to have the Chinese New Year characters than the Zodiac, if you're trying to go Chinese themed. Overall, this is a game that's a sign of its time. It was actually playable compared to Indiana Jones and the Impossible Machine, which that was just too much of a kick in the guts as far as its difficulty to make it worth putting up with, particularly in retrospect now, considering how little there really was to see in even this game that came out like 4 years later. I believe The Impossible Machine was 1999. None of this, though, is anywhere close to the quality of Indiana Jones and Fate of Atlantis, or even Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade as 2D point-and-click adventure games. You would have had way better writing, way better narrative, had you just made yet another point-and-click adventure game. I doubt it was 100% the thought that they were just running away from Fate of Atlantis because they knew they couldn't measure up, as much as it was a thought that all video games in the Xbox and PlayStation 2 era were moving to these 3D platformers and selling themselves on big, wide 3D levels that were leaning heavier and heavier into first-person or third-person shooting, which this really would have been around the time even when the controls started to evolve to what modern controls are as far as how you would first-person or third-person shooting. Halo's effect certainly probably influenced this game. I'm pretty sure Halo 1 came out around the launch, if not day one of the launch of the Xbox. But yeah, you can certainly see in these chapters, it got really, really long. Easily, you could have cut this out, this out, and this out, and just started in Hong Kong. And then that would have made a lot more sense. You, at that point, may have wanted to hint at some mystical stuff to begin with. Compare, like, Fate of Atlantis, where at the beginning of Fate of Atlantis, you do see a slight hint at mystical that Indiana Jones just waves away and doesn't believe in. But by the time you're at the end of the game, you fully have to believe in the mystical element in Fate of Atlantis because it's so overwhelmingly shown to you. So, if our female interest had been in the story, really, instead of popping up maybe 5 times for less than 10 minutes in total, she could have had a divining ability, which that, just off the top of my head, that would have been a pretty good thing. Is they used to use bones as chopsticks in China. I'm fairly certain what I'm about to say is accurate. And they used to throw those bones that had been carved into chopsticks, and the orientation in which they landed would be like a fortune-telling type thing, much like reading the tea leaves in the Western world. So if she had done that at the beginning of the game and done it just kind of as a silly thing, and that had given you some kind of hint to what was going to happen at the beginning of the game, that's how you would have introduced the mysticism. It also would potentially make her more of a character if she actually believes in the ancient Chinese cultures and respects it. You could easily see Indiana Jones being set in the 1940s, 1950s, not really respecting Asian culture and just saying it's all just a bunch of hooey, and then you could have some conflict there. Then you would have a character that starts off as a friendly rivalry between our ninja girl and Indy, and then it would more naturally develop over time into an actual romance, because there really was no development of romance in this at all. He saves her and then immediately tries to kiss her, and she's just cool with it because this is based on movies of the 80s where that totally would be acceptable and the concept of consent is thrown out the window. But it just gets worse in a video game sense, because we know this game has taken a lot longer than the 2-hour movie to tell less than what a 2-hour Indiana Jones movie would tell. I seriously doubt this story was written by, I guess I have to load, so we'll just load here, and we'll just load what the very beginning of the game would look like to start with, and hopefully that doesn't just load us into the game, because I wanted to say check the options as far as difficulty and see what it first highlights. It says we were on easy, which, yeah, the game was definitely not easy at certain points, particularly with the platforming and the instant deaths. This definitely would have also been a game that I would have absolutely not been willing to play if it was keyboard and mouse only. And yeah, we can see we did a decent job, but not really a great job as far as collecting artifacts. It looks like in the first level we missed one in the middle, in the second level we missed all 3 of them, in the third level we missed the one on the third, the fourth level we got all of them, 5th level we missed the last one, 6th level we missed the first 2, 7th level we missed the first 2, we missed the middle one on the 8th level, we missed everything on the 9th level, and we missed one at the beginning and end of the last level. But it is also possible that there's only 2 collectibles in the last level, or maybe even only 1 collectible in the last level, which I doubt. So it doesn't seem like it would really help you too much if you were to like try and select the levels. I'd basically need a I have no idea what a Cylon is while I'm looking at the loading screen. It looks like it might be a made-up island.
According to the map.
So you get this nice stone head, and you get the maps. They forgot completely about the idea of maps after the first third of the game. This is like the most dialogue and most animation you get in the whole game, right at the front. Then you get a throwback to the Impossible Machine in that you see skeletons, but skeletons stop meaning anything, really. And yeah, it's not like you're gonna get your items back or that you're going to be able to move particularly faster. So if you were to try and run through this level and find a collectible without a guide, you're going to be totally lost. You know that there is a collectible here, and I know that I'm pretty sure I collected it the first time, so you're effectively just starting all over again and playing the game a second time. The artifacts mean absolutely nothing. They don't give you an extra bit of health. They don't give you a bigger cantina. The cantina idea falls apart in the halfway point of the game because there's just not a they start giving you med kits. Even playing on easy, you never have enough bullets, and in that last sixth of the game at least, the idea of using bullets just gets thrown out the window. So there's a real inconsistency, I would say, for just what the gameplay mechanics even are when you start to get to the beginning of the game versus the end of the game. I guess this is the Emperor's Tomb. I just don't see a real reason why you need to load to the epilogue when all that would do is just show you the epilogue. Doesn't change the artifacts save file. So let's see the credits, and let's just see if my suspicions are proven somewhat correct, in that I wouldn't be surprised if they mention at least two companies, the Collective being the first one. But I also wouldn't be surprised, particularly in this era, if there were 2 or 3 companies that were support companies that went uncredited. Now, because we now know that there is just a vast problem of people not getting properly credited or mentioned at all in the credits, you really can't make D. James, who just one name apparently, that may be a typo. Yeah. In the past, I might have said, well, this is a medium-sized company for the time, that it doesn't really have that many people, so maybe some of the lackluster elements here could be dismissed, but really I don't believe that's the case. At Games, interesting. Wonder if that's the same company that makes the At Games Legends series of like mini scaled down arcade machines and fight sticks. Yep, a lot of nicknames showing up here, which isn't really super professional. Particularly since I would say at least 98% of everybody that has a nickname in the credits of a video game is not publicly known in the first place, so it wouldn't make sense. Look, if you want to say Larry Bird, aka, it's not Larry Bird, it's Larry Hibbard, I think is his name, but he's known as Major Nelson and he's the guy in charge of the Xbox division of Microsoft at the moment. If you wanted to use his nickname, Major Nelson, I guess that kind of makes sense. But generally speaking, you would have to be very publicly known to the average gamer, and there's very few people in the game development world that are publicly known at all. If you're crediting voice actors by what their stage names are, because they've been in movies or TV, sure, that also makes some sense. Most actors, or at least a lot of them, I won't say most, do have stage names that are slightly different or completely different from what their birth names are, and they would completely be unknown by their birth names. A lot of that has to do with just rules in the Screen Actors Guild. Some of it has to do with the massive amount of nepotism that happens in TV and movies, and they want to hide the fact that they are children, grandchildren of famous actors, or that they are cousins of famous actors. We are now getting quite a long list of personal thanks, and a very special thanks to George Lucas. I imagine George Lucas not involved in this either. Noticeably, no special thanks to Steven Spielberg, which, yeah, that seems weird to me, that Steven Spielberg was not mentioned in the credits at all. Yeah. I think Steven Spielberg still has the right to Indiana Jones, or has major influence there. Yeah, and I guess there's just nothing else to do. We've gone long enough. This is definitely a game of its time. I've said that several times. It has major frustration points, major difficulty spikes. It's a Tomb Raider ripoff. Probably a ripoff of something closer to Tomb Raider 4 or 5, not trying to look like the early Tomb Raider ones. This is what I would define as a second generation 3D platforming game, which really was just a stepping stone, one of many, to get to the point where we eventually had 3D platforming games that were pretty good, and then they started to branch out and specialize into different divisions. So you would have something like Assassin's Creed, which is technically a 3D platforming game, but it is heavily focused around climbing the exteriors of buildings. Or you have something like Mirror's Edge, which is technically a 3D platforming game that's focused around parkouring and running on the sides of buildings. Or you have something like Thief, which is more of a 3D platforming. Well, I assume Thief is. I haven't actually played this, but I assume Thief and Dishonored are more stealth on the rooftops of the buildings, with a little bit of platforming, but it not really being your main focus. More and more as games evolved, 3D platforming became less the main focus and less of a sales point. You have Sands of Time coming out, and games like that, where there is a lot of parkouring and platforming, but then you have a rewind time mechanic in Sands of Time to adjust for the major frustrations of dying over and over and over again when you miss a jump. And yeah, eventually the Tomb Raider series itself rebooted, and when it did reboot, it really wasn't much of a 3D platformer at all. Like, most open world games are now described more as kind of open world collectathons, more inspired by something like Far Cry, or yeah, Far Cry is a big influence, certainly, where you might have some wall climbing, certainly in the game, but it's not the main focus. It's just a way to get a player from point A to point B. Instead, you have a lot more items to pick up, and a lot more randomly spawning enemies, a lot more variety, and more of a natural feeling experience. In the real world, people generally are not climbing buildings and platforming very often, unless you're into specifically doing those actions for fun. And yeah, in the real world, most people don't climb the outsides of buildings. Most kids these days don't even really climb trees. So there was this disconnect from reality in game developers pushing an idea and then feeding off that idea over and over again, and evolving on that idea, when that idea was really pushing them further and further from realism. And when you get to the Tomb Raider reboot, you start to see a little bit more realism. It's still a fantasy action movie experience in the Tomb Raider reboot, but it's not a jungle gym built specifically for players to run around and climb and jump. And certainly people did not really love the experience of the Tomb Raider reboot because a lot of the platforming had been replaced with more stealth elements and hunting elements with a bow. But overall, I think it was a bold step in a new direction that the series probably needed. Had they just tried to remake the original Tomb Raider games, less people would have been satisfied by that. Although they definitely should have tried to potentially remake the narrative of the original Tomb Raider series and some of the memorable elements of the original Tomb Raider series, but remaster those. They did make one remaster, maybe even 2 or 3, but they weren't fairly recent to the rebooted series. They basically abandoned the history of Tomb Raider to start all over again. Which leads us to a good final point, in that Indiana Jones has just abandoned its history in the video game world completely. There is an Indiana Jones movie, what is it? The Dial of Destiny, I believe, that just came out as of this recording, and people don't seem super hyped around seeing that movie after Kingdom of the Crystal Skull was horribly received, and probably rightfully so. Kingdom of the Crystal Skull is pretty uninteresting as a movie, and for video games there is nothing happening at all, whereas it would have made a lot of sense to make something like The Last Crusade for the Temple of Doom, because I don't think there was ever a 2D point-and-click adventure game for the Temple of Doom. So you could have taken a fairly well-received, in hindsight, movie. I know a lot of people didn't like Temple of Doom when it originally came out, but people have basically forgotten that. So you could have hired a very small indie company to say, make a point-and-click adventure game based on the exact story of the Temple of Doom. We'll release it as a bit of advertising for the Dial of Destiny. Or you could have hired a bigger company, certainly, to make a game based on Dial of Destiny, and release it alongside, or at least announce it alongside the release of the movie, as a way of promotion. Or you could have made a point-and-click adventure game like Fate of Atlantis that was a whole new story. And all of this falls under LucasArts, which is owned by Disney. So Disney effectively not doing anything. Disney just wants to license out things to other companies for them to make. And in the case of Indiana Jones, while Disney may own LucasArts and thus may own, at least in part, the rights to all these Indiana Jones games, or at least all 4 of the games that were made, they would own in part because they were published by LucasArts, I'm sure. Steven Spielberg may actually own the rights to Indiana Jones, and Steven Spielberg may be the one that's saying no to any of that. Although I don't know why he would. Like, if he's going to make a movie, why wouldn't he agree to some cross-promotion? It could be an ego thing, certainly, that he doesn't want a video game to come out and be better received than his movie. But they're going to have to do that. It's very unlikely that the actor who plays Indiana Jones is going to be in any shape to make another Indiana Jones movie. He wasn't in shape to make the last 2. He's like 85 years old, Harrison Ford is. So it does not make sense for him to be the frontline actor, even if he is trying to shift into an older male lead position. It's not going to work very well for him. He would be better off being in the voice acting booth doing voice lines for video games, and by modern technology he could probably be doing enough voice lines to sell his artificial voice to use in the future after he's even died and passed on, because they do have the technology now to do that, where they could have him go into the booth, read a bunch of sounds or words, and then an AI could take that data and pretty accurately simulate anything they would have the character say. And then he wouldn't have to go back into the booth. He would get he and his family potentially would get a license fee for whenever they use that voice, and he would become effectively immortal. Now, is that great for other voice actors in the future who would want to potentially be an action hero like Harrison Ford? No. Is that great for voice actors who want to work in video games? No, because it's taking jobs away from living people, certainly. But is it great for an artistic creation? Pretty great, yeah. If you're an artist and you want Harrison Ford to sound like Indiana Jones in your Indiana Jones game 100 years from now, that's really your best solution. So, yeah. There's definitely some conflicts there as far as whether you want to create a great piece of art or whether you want to employ voice actors and make the industry as a whole, which is a capitalist system, sustainable and profitable enough that they continue to make games, and that there are people actually working on it instead of just computer algorithms making games, which only helps the management of a company that owns a computer algorithm at that point. Anyways, I've gone on a funny rant that has very little to do with this game, which is just to point out that there's not a lot to say around this game. I am a little surprised that the Asian romantic interest was such a smooth transition, considering how I wouldn't be surprised if Indiana Jones really did in the 1940s or 1950s have similar mentalities as most people in the 1940s and 1950s, which is to either look down on Asians or outwardly resent them. I mean, this would have been before, say, Pearl Harbor and World War II and all of that, but even before then, Asians were not seen as equals to Westerners. So a romance like that, or what they would have called race mixing back in the day, would have not been acceptable. But they have retroactively tried to make Indiana Jones seem more open-minded than he probably should have been for the time it was set in, which is, I guess, also the danger of setting a story in the era of Indiana Jones. But it also gave them the great benefit that they could have the Nazis as the bad guys over and over again, and I think that worked fairly well for the entire movie series. I'm probably rambling at this, and we're at an hour, so that's going to be it for this series. And we are now done with Indiana Jones games. So you can go back and see my coverage of Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade and Indiana Jones of the Fate of Atlantis. You can watch the 2 episodes of me struggling with the Impossible Machine, but I generally say skip those, and then you can watch all of this series. And that's it for Indiana Jones games in totality. I don't believe there is another game that is officially licensed that has Indiana Jones on it as far as video games goes. And unless they make something new, I suspect we won't ever see another Indiana Jones game, which is kind of a shame. Now, arguably, maybe Indiana Jones is not that relevant anymore. If you were a kid who was born in the year 2000 or later, you probably haven't seen Indiana Jones movies, or you haven't given them much thought. If you have seen them, you don't realize how big a deal movies would have been back then, and how big a deal Indiana Jones itself would have been. Like Temple of Doom, I believe, was the movie that created PG-13, whereas like The Last Crusade was considered a PG movie, when in retrospect it almost certainly should be a PG-13 or even rated R movie for its content. Many a kid watched the movie Temple of Doom and was terrified by the monkey brains eating scene, and that was considered acceptable to put a kid in front of a movie like that and not even really have parental guidance sitting next to them explaining that it's all fake and that it's not real, things like that. But yeah, potentially Indiana Jones has just lost relevancy, which eventually happens to all art, and it has been fully replaced by Lara Croft, who has her own stories and has gone in a different direction in the reboot, and Uncharted, which I don't think Uncharted is Nathan Drake is as interesting as Indiana Jones, but I also haven't played the Uncharted series. That being said, they've pretty much lost interest in making Uncharted games too, so it's only Lara Croft games that we suspect would continue to be made in the future, that I would suspect would continue to be made in the future. So we've just lost the idea of adventure games like these, realistic adventure games, down to just one series. We have some other games, certainly that are adventure games, but when you start to look at like Horizon as a series, that's a sci-fi futuristic adventure series, or Far Cry as a series is more of a semi-political intrigue series. Like there's nothing that feels just like it's trying to go for a pure adventure, unless you're talking kids games. Like Mario Odyssey is probably a great example of a pure kids game adventure series, and Pokemon, even though it is an RPG game, heavily leans on the idea of going on an adventure. And then there is plenty of like Japanese RPG games that heavily build around the idea of an adventure. Well, anyways, I'm getting tongue-tied, so that's going to be it for this series. As always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, comment, and watch every second of my videos, because that helps me with YouTube. If you want to support me even further, there's some links down below in the description box. Thank you for watching. Have a good evening.